What's up, and welcome to a special show today as I have Ryan Mcdowell from DLF Football, and you can see his Twitter account right now up on my screen. This man is a absolute legend in Dynasty circles. I'm very excited to have him on today. We're going to be breaking down pretty much our final thoughts, some top targets, juicy things we have for this upcoming weekend of football. I will be taking much more of a DFS spin as Ryan does most of the fantasy football and dynasty football heavy lifting, which I love. And one of the first things I wanted to talk about today was something that you actually tweeted out recently, and you had mentioned stuff about the Rams defense against Tampa, and I loved what you had said because people were starting to talk about this game as, potential fireworks, right? 49-point total, Sunday Night Football, studs everywhere, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Kupp, Woods, just, talent everywhere. And I saw your tweets, and I thought they were just absolutely genius. And, if there's anything you want to lead off before you dive into the analysis, by all means, go ahead, Ryan, but I figured we'd kick it off there.
Yeah, that sounds good. First of all, thanks for having me. This might be my first DFS show appearance. I've dabbled a little bit, but try to stay in my lane in Dynasty for sure. So, but I do some different things each week. I share them on Twitter. I share some of them on DLF, and DFS players have told me that they're helpful. Basically, looking a lot at player performance, a lot at specific matchups, and that's kind of what led me to that Rams thread that I posted earlier. And essentially, they have shut down everybody they've played. They still haven't allowed a top 12 wide receiver game at all. They haven't allowed a top a RB1 game since week 2. So I just don't want to play anybody against the Rams at all, and that includes Tampa.
Yeah, that's wild. And, I was actually shocked even to see the tight ends. Usually you see teams that shut down opposing wide receivers. Maybe it's because they, allow opposing running backs or tight ends to have big games. But we really have not seen that. And it's not like we can capitalize on Rob Gronkowski or the ghost of Rob Gronkowski or Rob Gronkowski light and Cameron Brate. There's really no clear-cut way to attack this one. And I love that spot. And that makes me very excited for Sunday Night Football for DFS purposes because in the showdown slate, the very popular trio of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown will be highly owned. And with seeing what you had put out there, and I follow these often, these little threads that you do, and I think they're phenomenal for DFS purposes. And I suggest all of my DFS following to go ahead and give Ryan a follow. You will not be upset about it. He gives phenomenal tidbits every single week, and I absolutely love to follow these. And when I look at Sunday night's showdown slate, I'm excited about rolling out the Rams defense. I think they'll be incredibly low owned and potentially stacking them with Darrell Henderson or one of those guys, Malcolm Brown, hopefully get a red zone touchdown and have a nice little defense and running back stack. And then, throw out Cooper Kupp or someone like that, hoping to get some PPR points. But I love that spot. I'm happy to start this conversation off with something that I saw you tweet today because I thought it was just a nice gem you had.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One other thing I do is to help me prepare for the week. And again, I mention this on Twitter and share this on Twitter each week. So hopefully some people find it helpful. But I like to look at basically how many top 12 fantasy games each team has both posted themselves and that they've allowed. I combine those numbers and then I combine them with their opponent to get a total for the matchup. Basically, the thinking is this team is either a specific team, and looking at the Rams and the Bucks right now, whether the team is posting these top 12 games themselves or if they're allowing them. That's a good sign that that's going to be a high-scoring game. It's going to be a game that we want to invest in from fantasy purposes, whether you're playing DFS or if you're looking for a tight end or a quarterback to stream in a seasonal league or something like that. So looking at that, specifically that Rams and Bucks game this week on Sunday night, it is the third lowest total score according to that metric I came up with of the week. So to me, even though the over under is kind of middle of the road or actually I guess it's among the highest of the week. That's a game I'll be avoiding. It just feels like a low scoring game, and I know for your purposes on Showdown Slate you can't exactly avoid it. You've got to pick somebody in there, but yeah, if you're thinking about those seasonal lineups, dynasty lineups, something like that, I'm probably just staying away from that game.
Yeah, I see the score right now. I've got it up on the big screen for everybody. 56 points for the, or 56 top 12s there for the
Right.
third lowest. That's pretty weak. And the first game I actually wanted to talk about after we dove into this tweet was actually the Atlanta and Saints game. And I see that as the highest one, surprisingly higher than Arizona and Seattle, which is going to be, likely go absolutely nuclear tonight for all things DFS and fantasy football. I'm very excited about that one. And I'm looking right now at my teamriseorfall.com study hub. We have this massive study hub where people are able to use them to just research all things fantasy football or DFS. And I'm looking at it right now on my screen, and what I'm seeing is the Atlanta Falcons, for as bad as we think the Seahawks are on defense, which they are, please don't get me wrong, the Falcons have given up more fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks than the Seahawks, who are giving up 353 yards passing per game. Now, that makes me incredibly interested in someone like Jameis Winston, and the rest of the field will likely be very interested in him as well. But I wonder what happens with someone like Jameis, who people have been kind of, night and day on how they think of him as a talent. What happens with someone like Jameis in dynasty circles where, he just fell into the starting quarterback as the Saints, and, oh, yeah, that's right, Drew Brees is kind of old. What are we doing here?
Yeah, from a dynasty perspective, obviously he's gained a ton of value even just over the past week, and it's not just because he's potentially the starter for the rest of the season or for the next month or whatever, however long this injury ends up keeping Brees out, but just that chance to showcase himself. I've said all along, and it's been pretty obvious to everyone that he's on that Teddy Bridgewater path. And of course, Bridgewater was there last year, got a chance to start a few games and turn that into a big contract and a starting job. So clearly that's what Winston wants to do. And I think it ends up happening. Honestly, I think he will be a starter in the league next year.
That's really interesting. So someone like Jameis Winston as a starting quarterback in 2021, is that someone that ends up kind of nudging his way into the top 12 in dynasty circles, or is it QB1?
Potentially. The back end of the QB1 range right now in dynasty is really in flux with guys like Brees and some of these players getting older. We of course have the big three rookies coming in next year. We've got at least two more rookie quarterbacks coming in 2021 in Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields that are automatically going to be valued as top 12 guys. So it's really a little bit of the youth movement. I would be surprised if Winston can get back inside the top 12 from a ranking or an ADP perspective, but we know he can score as a top 12 quarterback.
Yeah, sure. He might probably be just one of those best ball type targets, right? I mean, each and every week he's good for 304 touchdowns or 5 picks and 150 yards. So
yeah,
he's perfect there. But one thing, there's no in between. You're absolutely right. So I'm looking at the Saints snap rate last week, and in Week 10, we actually saw Michael Thomas take a significant snap increase. He had 55% of the snaps run in Week 9, and in Week 10, he had 78%. So while the statistics did not follow, he did have 6 targets and then 7 targets in those 2 games. It makes me actually pause for a second and think, oh, man, actually, I had kind of written him off, and even earlier in this week had conversations saying, oh, yeah, of course I'd take Julio Jones in this spot against the Saints. But listen, the Saints are giving up only 230 yards passing per game. We know Atlanta's giving up over 3 bills, and they're the worst team in the NFL against quarterbacks, second worst against wide receivers. Does that make Michael Thomas the preferred option in your mind over Julio, or is Julio with that talent and potentially no Ridley still the pick if you had to choose between the two?
Yeah, I don't. It may honestly come down to their price on whatever site you might be playing on. It to me, it's that close. But I am excited to see what Michael Thomas can do. He's now two or 3 weeks back from that injury, and even with Jameis in the game and not Brees, I don't even view that as a negative. We know that the kind of the kind of ball that Jameis plays. He's not going to be afraid to throw the ball around and not going to be afraid to make mistakes, honestly. So we'll just see if Michael Thomas can take advantage of that. But the other thing we always saw with Winston in Tampa Bay, he focused on those two guys, just peppered Evans and Godwin with targets. Now we see Tom Brady spreading it around a little bit more. And if you've invested in Godwin or Evans, it's been a little more frustrating. But for Jameis's purpose for his time in New Orleans, that tells me he's going to focus certainly on Michael Thomas, on Alvin Kamara, and honestly, it could hurt guys like Emmanuel Sanders and Jared Cook.
Yeah, and two thoughts came to mind immediately when you started to talk. I knew what road you were going down, and it made me look at the fantasy points allowed. And Atlanta, shockingly, and it's not like it's some astronomical number, but they are allowing 11.97 points to opposing tight ends, which is higher. It's more than 1 point than any other team on the DFS slate. So that does make me have a little interest in someone like Jared Cook, but only specific to doing game stacks. That means if I'm rolling out Jameis Winston, Michael Thomas, Jared Cook, and then on the opposite side, I also am including Julio Jones. I'm just saying that I am investing in something where I think it's going to be a potential shootout. So I think in those ways you can kind of attack this game, but outside those main couple pieces, the Emmanuel Sanders and Jared Cooks of the world, I think you're right. They're going to be hindered. I think you're going to get a lot of targets going Michael Thomas's way, and Alvin Kamara is probably the alpha and omega this week.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, with this game, it's not it's not a surprise to think you would like a game stack in this one. But you're totally right as far as what the Falcons have done against tight ends. And according to my numbers, they've allowed 6 tight end 1 games, which is tied for the most in the league. Ooh. But the Saints have also allowed 6 tight end 1 games. So I could almost see Winston and Thomas, but then bring it back with Hayden Hurst.
Yeah.
Especially if Ridley is up in the air. I think Ridley plays probably, but even if he's at less than 100%, Hayden Hurst makes some sense there too.
Well, no wonder DFS players like you, man. Whether you are like all in on your DFS content, you clearly understand value, and that's pretty much DFS 101 is, how valuable is this guy versus this guy, and then putting things together in certain constructs. With someone like Michael Thomas, I am intrigued about his long-term prospects. Does someone like Jameis Winston potentially taking over as the quarterback boost his dynasty appeal?
I don't think so, really. It certainly doesn't hurt because there's been obvious questions for years now about some of these top wide receivers and what happens when they lose their quarterback. Not only Michael Thomas, but the guys in Pittsburgh whenever Ben steps away, and it was. It's been a question with Keenan Allen before Rivers, and of course, that's turned out pretty well for sure. But I don't think Winston would necessarily help Thomas's case. I mean, Thomas is a guy who came in as the clear wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, and between the injury and the slow return, now the injury to Brees, it's just been a disastrous year for Thomas and his dynasty value. He's for most people, he's probably outside of the top 5 wide receivers at this point. So he can recover that value, but I don't necessarily think it would be because of Brees, because of Winston.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and logic would say that having a younger quarterback would boost his dynasty appeal to some extent. But there's so much talent all around, so it's not as cut and dry as that. Absolutely, and you nailed that. And that's for me, for someone who doesn't do a lot of dynasty football. This is the type of content I'm here for, man. This is what I need to hear. That puts me on the radar with certain players and how to view them long term. For me, it's hard, right? I'm a day by day, sure. I'm a week by week type scope of research, and we got to do this more, man. I appreciate you coming on here and help me out. You had mentioned these Steelers wide receivers. It was actually the transition I wanted to head into. And, Big Ben, I wanted to bring up the fact that 3 of the last 4 games he's thrown the ball 42 or more times. He's had 300 passing yards in the last 2 games, cleared the 300-yard mark, I should say. And, guys like Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool are just phenomenal DFS targets each and every week. They're facing the Jaguars, who are getting obliterated by opposing quarterbacks. They can't stop the football in the the air. But, long term, you had just mentioned it, and that was my big question for you. What the heck do you do with these guys? Deontay, Chase, Juju Smith-Schuster, if Big Ben is gone in a year or two, what happens to them? How do you rank them in Dynasty, and do any of them have a higher ceiling in your mind than one or the other?
Yeah, they're tough to rank in Dynasty as far as ordering the three of them. Entering the season, of course, it was clearly Juju as the top guy, and then we liked everybody else, but they weren't necessarily in that same tier. And I think now you could argue that all three are in the same tier. As far as life after Ben, first of all, it seems like we'll get a couple more years, so I don't think we have to worry about it quite yet. But he's always one who could surprise us. But really, I mentioned the quarterback class coming in, and it's not just Lawrence and Fields. There could be 5 first-rounders in this class. I guess I've looked at what the Chargers have done, at what some of these other teams have done with the young quarterbacks, and I'm worried less and less about what happens after we lose these veterans to retirement, or, knock on wood, hopefully not to injury or something like that. But that's what we've seen with Brees. But basically, I would be investing in all three of those guys. They're all young. And in Juju's case, there's also been rumors that this would be his last year in Pittsburgh. So he may not have to worry about Ben regardless.
Yeah, that's really interesting because James Washington, very talented fourth wide receiver that would ascend in that depth chart. That'd be interesting. I was not even totally aware of that, to be honest. Now, there's another side of this, and, we're looking at these older quarterbacks who potentially move on in a year or two. What about a team like Jacksonville, who they're playing this week, who has, a bevy of very talented young pass catchers in Laviska Shenault, DJ Chark, and Keelan Cole? I mean, these guys are pretty decent. Long-term projecting, though, I find it very difficult because I don't feel like I understand totally the ceiling or even the floor of the quarterbacks on the Jags roster right now.
Well, honestly, if we're talking long term, if you're thinking about Dynasty, I don't think it matters. They're certainly playing for, in their minds, Trevor Lawrence. With that number 1 pick, if they don't get to that point, Justin Fields at 102 would be a great second prize there. So they're going to have a new quarterback in 2021. It's not going to be Minshew. It's not going to be Jake Luton. So in Dynasty right now, and a lot of leagues have trade deadlines coming up, it's a great time to invest in Shenault. He's been banged up. He's kind of been quiet this year, especially compared to some of the other rookie wide receivers. Great time to invest in DJ Chark as well.
Yeah, and actually I wanted to ask about a couple other rookies and a team that I thought initially would be after one of these big quarterbacks, to be honest. But then the Raiders keep on winning football games, and they're ruining things now. And I look at players like Henry Ruggs and Brian Edwards, who were the talk of the town in the offseason. A lot of buzz surrounding their names, and it clearly has cooled off in fantasy circles. But as far as dynasty circles, are people still very high on these guys?
I would say it's pretty similar to what you might see in DFS or in redraft leagues. We're really focused on the players that are performing right now. So guys like T. Higgins, who has been a standout, obviously, and Justin Jefferson, those rookie receivers who are really producing on a week-to-week basis are the ones who are shooting up rankings. They're being valued even much higher than they were a few weeks ago. And the rookies, even if they were first-round rookie picks in dynasty leagues, the ones who are quiet, including Ruggs and Edwards, and we could maybe throw, Denzel Mims and Michael Pittman. Both of those have started to come along here in the past couple of weeks. Those guys are being undervalued. It's a great time to try to target those players as well, because they're going to get their chance. Maybe it's not even this year, but again, in a dynasty league, you have to think long term.
Yeah, for sure, and it's tough sometimes. I appreciate your feedback because I look at a game like KC in Las Vegas, and people like Henry Ruggs is still in play for me. He's still on my radar. So you mentioned one name I'm actually thrilled about, Michael Pittman Jr. I think he's very, very talented, and over the last 2 weeks he's at 87% snap rate and 81%. He's garnered 7 and 8 targets in those 2 games, and a market share that's quite low, but that's buoyed by a terrible week 8. We only had 1 target. Over the last 2 games, I believe it's upward around 28% market share, and that's a bona fide number 1 wide receiver for Phillip Rivers right now. And long term with someone like Michael Pittman, is he starting to ascend into that territory of maybe Chase Claypool light? Maybe. I mean, where do you go in that range?
Yeah, I think he's getting there as far as his dynasty value, and I think in a typical week he would be a great DFS target and an underrated one. This week, to me, it really comes down to Jair Alexander's health. If he's healthy and back from that concussion, I would probably be staying away from Pittman, even with that market share. But yeah, you look at that team, and he's clearly the top guy there. Hopefully, we get a healthy Paris Campbell back. Maybe later this year, most likely next season, but T.Y. Hilton is certainly just cooked. So it's Pittman and Campbell for the long term there.
Yeah, and you mentioned for DFS purposes, tough week all around for both Packers and Colts players. I think it's one of those stay away games, even though there's some big names involved. I mean, we're looking at the Packers giving up just over 15 points per game to quarterbacks. Wide receivers are pretty much shut down unless Jair is out. Colts are on their own end have been absolutely elite. And I know in DFS circles, people look at them and they say, yeah, they're a good play each and every week. But in fantasy circles, they've been phenomenal. They have been absolutely phenomenal. I think they're tied for the most fantasy points in a lot of fantasy leagues right now on defense. And they're giving up the least points to opposing quarterbacks. So put someone like Aaron Rodgers, even though he's got that big name, big price tag, players all around him, he's just not one of those targets anymore, especially with Davante Adams potentially on the shelf this week. Going to be an interesting spot. Listen, I know we have the Thursday night football game tonight. Ryan, I absolutely loved having you on today. And, I really hope that my DFS community can give you some follows and start hooking up with you here on Twitter and on your website, DLF Football. What is it? DynastyLeagueFootball.com, excuse me.
Yeah, no problem.
I appreciate your time today, and we'll have to do this again, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. It's fun to merge the two worlds here.
It really is. And I think every once in a while when I'm so deep into the DFS season, it's really hard for me to think of anything outside of it. So to have some of these questions of mine answered, they were truly not even from my members. Ryan, they were just things that I was interested in and I needed answered. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.